What would you do if your only friend risked everything for you? That was the day I learned loyalty comes at a cost, and not the one you'd expect. The forest always smelled different in September, that sharp, honest scent of pine and distant rain. Jack, my retriever, had his own ideas about forest etiquette, crash through every bush, chase every squirrel, and return covered in mud, looking prouder than a parade winner. My son, Ben, said we needed the exercise. My wife, Martha, said we needed the togetherness. If I'm honest, I just needed a break from my inbox and the relentless grind of being everyone's fixer. On the morning it all began, I did something uncharacteristic. I left my phone at home. I told myself it was a moral reset, but the truth? I was tired of being on call for everyone but my own family. Instead, I grabbed a thermos of burnt coffee, cinched my jacket tight, and led us out, Jack bounding ahead like he owned the world. It started well, too well. Ben, for once, wasn't glued to his Nintendo, and Martha didn't mention her mother. For a fleeting hour, we looked like those obnoxious families in hiking commercials. I should have known it wouldn't last. The first injustice hit before noon, as it always does when you're foolish enough to hope for peace. We stumbled onto a campsite. Not ours, a stranger's. Beer cans, cigarette butts, a ripped tent. A mess. Jack sniffed around, tail stiff, hackles up. Ben, always the diplomat, picked up a can and said, "People suck, Dad." Before I could respond, a shot echoed through the valley. Not close, but close enough. Martha's face went pale. "Is it hunting season?" she whispered. Ben's eyes got big. Jack growled, low and menacing, every muscle tense. For a heartbeat, time held its breath. It's funny how injustice feels, not like fear, not quite. More like a cold splash that wakes you up, even when you want to stay dreaming. My family looked at me for answers, and I did what fathers do best, pretended to have one. "Let's keep moving," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "And stay close." The forest seemed darker after that. Shadows grew teeth, and every snapped twig felt personal. Jack didn't leave my side, which, in retrospect, was the first sign. But at the time, I chalked it up to nerves. The rest of the hike was uneventful, at least on the surface. But the damage was done. That sense of safety, of Sunday morning invincibility, was gone. We made camp by the creek. Ben collected firewood, Martha tried to act unbothered, and Jack watched the trees, ears twitching. That night, I lay awake listening to the wind. Jack curled against my legs, a living, breathing shield. I thought I heard something out in the dark, but maybe it was just my own guilty conscience. Because I'd kept a secret from them, one that started with another lie, another "for your own good." But none of us could imagine what was waiting in the woods. What happened next changed everything. You won't want to miss how it unfolds. Have you ever seen a wild animal look you in the eye, and realize you might not walk away? That morning, I learned what real fear is. But what came after was worse. The world looks different at dawn. Everything's sharper, hungrier. I rolled out of my sleeping bag, spine aching, knees protesting. Martha was already boiling water, hair tied back in the battle braid she used for emergencies. Ben slept on, oblivious. Jack hadn't moved all night, or maybe he hadn't slept at all. We ate in silence. Even the birds sounded nervous. I tried to make small talk, failed. The tension was a third person at our table, sullen and stubborn. Ben insisted on fishing at the creek, and I let him, anything to give Martha and me 5 minutes of normal. Jack tagged along, ever the faithful. It happened fast. That's the thing about disaster, it doesn't schedule an appointment. One moment, I was untangling fishing line, the next, I heard Jack's bark, a sound I'd never heard before, not playful, not warning. It was pure, animal terror. Then I saw it. A grizzly, massive and wet-furred, standing where the creek curved, nostrils flaring. Its eyes found me, and for a second, I felt like a teenager again, powerless, voiceless, waiting for something bigger to decide my fate. I wanted to scream, to run. I did neither. Ben froze, fishing rod dangling from his hand like a broken promise. Jack snarled, putting himself between us and the bear. It charged. Everything went sideways. Ben stumbled, I yanked him back. Jack lunged, barking and snapping, fur bristling. The bear swiped, a sound like wet leather tearing. Martha screamed. Jack darted left, drawing the bear after him, away from us. The next 60 seconds lasted an eternity. I heard Jack yelp, saw fur flying, felt a numbness creep up my spine. And then, just as suddenly, the bear turned and lumbered off, leaving a mess of broken branches, blood, and fur. Jack limped back, side torn, eyes wild. He collapsed at my feet, tongue lolling, tail wagging weakly. I pressed my sweatshirt against his wound, hands shaking. Ben sobbed. Martha knelt beside us, face white. He saved us, Ben whispered. He saved us all. But all I could think was, what if that wasn't the only thing he saved us from? Because the guilt gnawed at me, louder than the chaos. I knew something my family didn't. And after today, I'd have to tell them, or lose everything. This is just the beginning. The real secret is about to surface. Stay for the truth that could destroy us. What would you do if the one thing holding your family together was a lie? The truth clawed its way to the surface that night, and nothing could put it back. Jack survived the first hour. Barely. I don't remember carrying him, I just remember the weight, the smell of blood and pine, Ben's shaking hands, Martha's frantic whispering. My brain went cold, the old survival autopilot. I wrapped Jack's wound with my shirt and prayed to whatever gods look after fools and family dogs. We'd planned 2 more days in the woods. Now the plan was just, get out. I stuffed our gear while Martha dialed every emergency number her phone could reach. Of course, there's no signal when you actually need it. We made a stretcher out of branches. Ben cried the whole time, cheeks streaked with snot and terror. Jack licked his hand, even as he bled all over my jeans. The forest wasn't just woods now, it was a gauntlet. Every sound felt loaded. Every step, a dare. I marched us back the way we came, adrenaline pumping lies about how Jack's tough, he'll make it. I knew I was lying. I just hoped no one would call me out. Somewhere between mile 3 and 4, Martha broke the silence. Why was Jack so on edge all weekend? Her voice was too calm. I recognized the warning, years of marriage will teach you the difference between questions and accusations. I dodged. Maybe he smelled the grizzly from the start. She gave me a look sharp enough to cut bark. Don't. Not now. Ben glared at me, his own suspicion growing. Even in crisis, family has a way of sniffing out weak spots. I kept walking, one foot in front of the other, hating myself for every step. Because I remembered, 2 years ago, a different forest, a different secret. Jack hadn't always been ours. He belonged to my brother before my brother vanished. A hiking accident, the coroner said. A family tragedy, the papers wrote. But I'd never told Martha the full truth. Not about the debts, not about the screaming matches, not about the last fight where Jack had been the only witness. When my brother disappeared, Jack came to us with a new limp and eyes that seemed to say, you know more than you're telling anyone. That knowledge burned under my skin even now. And after today, with my family staring at me across a bloodied dog and a trail of half-spoken lies, I knew my past was about to rip everything apart. We reached the road by dusk. A stranger in a pickup stopped, took one look at Jack and Ben, and loaded us in without a word. On the drive to the nearest vet, the silence was so thick you could almost taste the accusation. At the clinic, I signed the forms with shaking hands. Ben hovered by Jack's side, refusing to go home. Martha stared at me, her question burning a hole through every excuse. "What aren't you telling us, Mark?" I wanted to say, nothing. I wanted to say, everything. All I managed was, not here. Not now. But I knew the reckoning was coming. And the truth was, I deserved it. We all have scars. Some are visible. Some are secrets. The next chapter, nobody gets out unscathed. Would you forgive the person who shattered your family, if it meant saving the one you loved most? Sometimes, the price of truth is higher than betrayal. Night at the vet's office is its own brand of hell. The walls hum with fluorescent lights and unspoken fears. Martha paced the hallway, arms crossed so tight she might snap. Ben curled next to Jack's gurney, clutching the stuffed bear he'd had since he was 5. The irony wasn't lost on me. The vet patched Jack up with more skill than hope. "He's lucky," she said, "but the next 24 hours are critical." Lucky? If you call being mauled for my mistakes luck, then sure. Martha found me outside, leaning against the vending machine, eyes raw. Talk. One word, but loaded, the old marriage contract, still valid even when everything else crumbled. I started slow, but once you open the floodgates, there's no stopping. About my brother. About the fights, the money, the last hike that ended with a scream and Jack running back alone. About how I'd let my family believe the sanitized version, lost hiker, tragic accident, and how Jack, by some miracle, had found us later. About the guilt that chewed through every family dinner since. Martha listened, stone-faced. She was always better at silence than I was. When I finished, she didn't cry. She just shook her head. "You never gave us the chance to grieve. You stole that from Ben. From me." Her anger was the cold, hard kind, the kind that doesn't explode, just freezes everything it touches. Inside, Ben watched through the glass. He saw his parents talking but couldn't hear the words. He just held Jack's paw, whispering the promises kids make when they think no one's listening. "I'll never leave you. I'll never let Dad be alone. I'll always protect you." Back in the waiting room, Martha finally sat. "You brought us here because you wanted to protect us. But you lied." She looked at me, tired, spent. "You don't have to fix everything. Just tell the truth. That's all we ever needed." I nodded. It was the only thing left. Jack survived the night, because of course he did, loyal to the end, no matter how much we let him down. But when morning came, I knew I'd have to face Ben, and let him see the cracks in the hero he thought he had for a father. Because sometimes, the only way out is through. Tomorrow, nothing will be the same. The family's greatest test is still to come, and forgiveness may not be enough. What happens when you finally face the truth, and life throws you one more test? Sometimes, survival isn't just about what you confess, but who you fight for when the past refuses to stay buried. Jack's wounds began to heal, but the wounds between us only deepened. The morning after I confessed, Ben barely spoke to me. He left for school with a hug for Jack and nothing for me. Martha kept her distance, moving around the house with the precision of someone trying not to break what little remained. I tried to fill the days with routine, work, chores, pointless emails, paying bills. Every sound in the house seemed sharper, the click of Martha's mug on the counter, Ben's door closing too softly, Jack's slow, limping steps down the hall. Guilt gnawed at me like a toothache I couldn't ignore. But families aren't held together by comfort. They're held together by what you do when everything is uncomfortable. 3 days after Jack came home, the phone rang just after dawn. A sheriff's deputy on the other end. "Mr. Sullivan, we found something up near Oxbow Trail. It's about your brother. We need you to come in." The room spun. I heard Martha's gasp from the kitchen. Ben looked up, eyes wide. Jack, sensing the tension, hobbled over and pressed his nose against my hand. I thought I was done with secrets. I thought I'd buried the past for good. But the past, it turns out, keeps its own schedule. We drove to the ranger station in brittle silence. The deputy met us at the door, hat in his hands. He explained, some hikers found remains, clothing, a wallet, what was left of a backpack. DNA confirmed it was my brother. My world shrank to a pinpoint. I braced for anger, for blame. But all Martha did was grip my hand. Ben stood frozen, silent, his face pale as milk. Jack, even slower now, pressed himself to my leg, eyes searching mine for permission to trust. The questions came: would we claim the body? Did we want to see the site? Did we need a chaplain? I nodded at all the right places but barely heard them. My mind spun with memories, old arguments, laughter around a campfire, Jack as a puppy curled up between us. Afterwards, back home, we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where secrets were first told. Martha reached across and took my hand. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," she said, voice thick with exhaustion and something like forgiveness. "I'm tired of hiding from our life," I whispered. "Tired of pretending loss is weakness." Ben, brave in his own way, finally broke his silence. "Were you and Uncle John fighting the last time?" "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "But he loved you, Ben. I need you to remember that. He was lost, not just in the woods, but inside. I should have told you. I should have told everyone." Ben nodded slowly, eyes shining with tears he wouldn't let fall. "Can we go say goodbye?" It wasn't the ending I wanted. But maybe it was the one we needed. A week later, the three of us, 4, counting Jack, hiked up Oxbow Trail. The forest looked different, less threatening. At the site, we left wildflowers and a photo of us, the last family picture before everything broke. Ben said a few quiet words. Martha cried openly. I finally let myself grieve, for my brother, for all the lost years, and for the fear that had kept me silent. As we turned to leave, Jack nudged Ben forward, his tail wagging for the first time since the attack. On the drive home, something shifted between us, not a full repair, but the first threads of a new trust. Jack would always have his scars, and so would we. But scars mean you survived. Scars are proof that something tried to destroy you, and failed. That night, I sat on the porch, Jack at my feet, Ben and Martha laughing inside over something simple and small. The wind was full of pine and possibility. For the first time in a long time, I believed we might actually be okay. But healing is never a straight path. What came next tested us all over again, and proved that sometimes, facing danger together is the only way to become a family again. Can a family ever be safe when the wild is at their door, and the past refuses to let go? This time, danger comes not just from the forest, but from within their own hearts. The weeks that followed the hike to Oxbow Trail were both healing and unsettling. We settled into uneasy peace, our wounds too fresh for old routines. Every night, I caught myself listening for Ben's laughter, for the scrape of Martha's chair, for the steady sound of Jack's breathing by my bed. Scars, yes, but we were mending. But just when you think you're done with storms, life sends another. It started one night, just as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the forest faded to blue. I was on the porch with Jack, watching the day disappear, letting my mind wander. Jack's ears pricked up, a sound, faint but real. He growled, low and steady. Inside, Martha called from the kitchen, "Mark, did you hear that?" Before I could answer, Ben burst in, eyes wide. "Dad, there's something by the fence." I saw eyes. Big ones. I reached for the old flashlight and headed out, Jack by my side. My heart thudded in my chest. This wasn't just some raccoon or stray dog. Jack's body language was all tension and warning. We reached the edge of our property, where the garden faded into thick woods. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw them, tracks, far too big for any dog. Fresh, pressed deep into the mud. My blood went cold. Another bear, or the same one, drawn back by the scent of old wounds and new fear? Jack barked, loud and defiant. Something rustled in the darkness. Ben, against all orders, had followed us outside. He clung to my sleeve, his voice trembling, "Dad, is it back?" I wanted to lie, to promise safety, but Jack answered for me. He lunged forward, barking harder, a living wall between us and the black, shifting edge of the woods. Suddenly, something crashed through the underbrush. The bear, drawn by our scent, burst into the yard. For a heartbeat, I saw its massive shoulders and dark eyes, so close I could smell its wild, earthy breath. Jack didn't hesitate. Despite his limp, he charged, teeth bared, risking everything again for the family that had broken and rebuilt around him. Martha screamed from the porch. I grabbed Ben and shoved him behind me, hard in my throat. But this time I wasn't a passive witness. Something in me snapped. All the guilt, fear, and regret boiled over. I grabbed the garden rake and shouted, slamming it against a tree, desperate to distract the beast. The bear hesitated, drawn to the noise. Jack circled, fearless despite his wounds. "Get inside." I roared at Ben and Martha. They ran. I stood my ground, heart pounding, legs shaking, refusing to let terror make me useless again. At last, the bear backed away, unwilling to challenge a man and a wild dog together. It vanished into the woods, leaving only crushed grass and claw marks as proof. I dropped the rake, breathless, shaking, but alive. Jack limped back to me, tail wagging, tongue lolling, eyes bright with adrenaline. I knelt and hugged him, tears mixing with sweat and dirt. Inside, Martha wrapped us both in her arms, and Ben squeezed in tight. Our family, so battered, so imperfect, but still holding on. That night, we all slept in the living room, Jack in the center, our wounded guardian, our bridge between danger and forgiveness. I realized something had changed. I wasn't protecting them alone anymore. We protected each other. But peace is fragile, and trust takes work. The true test for our family wasn't over, it was only beginning. Next time, it wouldn't be the wild that threatened us, but the choices we'd have to make as a family. How do you rebuild trust after every secret has come to light? Sometimes, the hardest part isn't surviving the wild, it's facing the truth you brought home with you. After the second bear encounter, word spread quickly through the neighborhood. People came by, some with sympathy, some with suspicion. "Maybe you should move," one neighbor suggested, half serious, half mocking. "Some places just attract trouble." I smiled politely, but inside, I felt the sting. Was this house cursed? Or were we simply paying the price for things left unsaid too long? That week, Martha and I barely spoke. Not out of anger, but from exhaustion, like two boxers in their corners, waiting for the next round. Ben, restless, hovered between us and Jack, his schoolwork slipping, shadows growing under his eyes. The only one who seemed unfazed was Jack, who slept in the hall, every sense tuned to danger, as if he'd accepted that this was his purpose. One rainy night, while Martha was out late at work, Ben crept into the living room, clutching the photograph from our hike to Oxbow Trail. "Dad, are we ever going to be normal again?" he asked. I wanted to give him the classic reassurance, "Of course, son." But I'd made enough false promises. "Normal's overrated," I said at last. "But we can be honest. Even when it's hard." Ben chewed his lip. "Did you ever wish you could start over? Like, move somewhere new, just the three of us? Forget everything?" His question hit me harder than any bear. Was I the one holding us back? Was my fear, my history, what kept my family trapped in this cycle? That night, after Martha came home, we sat down together. No distractions. Just the three of us, Jack dozing at our feet. Martha finally spoke first. "I'm tired of living in survival mode," she said. "I want a real life, Mark. I want Ben to have friends, a safe home, not this fortress." I nodded. "I know. I've been hiding, not just from the wild, but from myself. From you." Ben looked from one of us to the other, hope and fear warring in his eyes. "What if we left?" he asked quietly. "What if we started over?" We sat with the question, letting it fill the room. The idea of leaving, of walking away from everything familiar, everything haunted, was terrifying. But so was staying, and watching our son learn fear as his first language. Finally, Martha took my hand, and for the first time in months, I didn't flinch. "Let's try," she said. "Let's choose each other, not just survival." Ben smiled, Jack thumped his tail, and for a moment, I saw the family we could become. That night, for the first time in years, I dreamed of possibility, not regret. But breaking from the past is never easy. Packing up your life means choosing what, and who, is worth carrying forward. In the next chapter, one last secret will force us to decide what family really means. And once we close that door, there's no going back. Can a family ever truly start over, or do old scars always follow? Sometimes, the bravest thing isn't fighting the wild, but saying goodbye. The decision to leave didn't happen overnight, but once we made it, everything moved fast. For the first time in years, our house felt alive with something other than tension: stacks of boxes, laughter over old photos, arguments about what to keep and what to throw away. Martha dug up her mother's china from the back of a dusty cupboard. Ben found his baby's shoes and tried to fit them on Jack's paw. The dog played along, wise and patient, the only one of us who'd truly seen everything. We told the neighbors we were moving. Some nodded with understanding, others looked relieved. It didn't matter. This was about us. On our last night, we sat in the empty living room, the three of us, Jack curled between. I tried to make a speech, but the words caught in my throat. It was Martha who said what needed to be said. We survived more than we ever thought we could. We kept secrets, we broke, and we healed. Now we get to choose what kind of family we are. Ben leaned his head on Jack's back. "Can Jack come, too?" We all laughed, the best medicine after all that sorrow. The next morning, we drove away as the sun was rising, the house shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror. No one spoke for a long time. Sometimes, starting over is just about being brave enough to let go. The new town wasn't perfect. There were bills to pay, fences to fix, new neighbors to greet, but it was ours. We hiked new trails, always together, always with Jack in the lead. Ben made friends. Martha started a garden. I found work that didn't feel like a punishment. The wild was still out there, somewhere, but so was forgiveness. So was the future. One evening, as we sat on the porch, Ben looked up at me and asked, "Dad, do you ever miss the old place?" I thought of the scars, mine, Martha's, Ben's, Jack's. I thought of everything we'd lost, and everything we'd saved. "Sometimes," I said. "But I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything." Jack, old and gray around the muzzle, nudged my hand. Family, in the end, is just who you choose to hold on to, scars and all. No wild animal, no secret, no mistake can keep you from the people willing to fight for you. Starting over isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing, every day, to move forward, together. Thank you for following this journey. If your own family has scars, maybe this is the sign you need. Survival is only the beginning. The rest is up to you.
The wet asphalt glowed under streetlights when veteran trucker Jack saw it. A golden retriever dragged behind a car, bleeding and staggering. The driver's face was empty. Jack's heart pounded. One choice. One night. Saving the dog might also save the part of himself he thought was gone forever. The scream didn't belong on a highway. It cut through the hum of Jack Connors's 18-wheeler. A thin, tearing sound that made his chest tighten before he even knew why. He snapped his eyes to the mirror, and there it was. A golden retriever, rope at its neck stumbling in the spray of headlights. Rain-slick asphalt threw back the glow of the streetlights, turning the scene into something unreal. The dog fought to keep its legs under it, every step jerking against the pull of the car ahead. At the wheel, a man stared forward with the stillness of someone who'd already stopped caring. Jack felt the wheel go slick under his hands. The rig's engine growled as he closed the gap. The driver didn't slow. He dropped 2 gears, swung into the left lane, and hit the horn so hard his own chest rattled. The truck slid across both lanes, blocking the way. Brakes screamed behind him. The car ahead skidded to a halt. Jack was out of the cab before the air brake hiss had faded. Cold rain slapped his face as he rounded the truck's grill. The retriever was crumpled on its side, rope still pulling at its neck. Mud and blood streaked its coat, its ribs moving too fast under matted fur. Jack crouched, his boots sinking into the water, pooling in the asphalt cracks. The driver just watched from behind the glass, face blank as a shut door. Jack slid his hand under the dog's jaw. The retriever's eyes lifted to meet his, clouded but still burning faintly with something. Plea? Pain? Maybe both. The knot came loose under his fingers, the rope falling wet and heavy to the ground. "That's done," he muttered. The dog's head sagged into his palm. Its breath came in hot, damp bursts against his skin. Jack stood, cradling the weight of it, feeling the heartbeat stutter against his arm. The driver's gaze never shifted. The rain thickened, pattering against the hood of the truck. Out here there was no one else, just a man, a dog, and a choice that couldn't be taken back. The retriever's tail twitched once, weak, but alive. And something in Jack, something he'd left behind years ago, twitched with it. That's when the night stopped being about the road. Jack didn't look back at the driver. There was nothing to find there. Whatever kind of man could drag a dog like that? His face had already said everything Jack needed to know. He shifted the retriever's weight in his arms and moved toward the cab. The dog's head pressed faintly into his chest, eyes closing, body limp, but not gone. He got the passenger door open with one arm, the smell of diesel and wet steel spilling out into the night. Inside, the heat from the vent still lingered. Jack eased the dog onto the passenger seat, tucking the rope under the floor mat so it wouldn't brush against him again. The retriever's breathing rattled, but it kept going. Jack turned back to the road, bracing for trouble. The car was still there, headlights dim through the curtain of rain. The driver hadn't stepped out. He just sat, unmoving, like the outcome didn't matter either way. Jack walked to the front of his truck, keeping his shoulders loose. "You're done," he called over the rain. His voice came out flat even, the way you talk to someone you don't want to hear from again. The man in the car gave no reply, just that empty stare. Then, without warning, the car reversed hard, tires splashing through the puddles, and disappeared into the dark beyond the streetlights. Jack didn't follow it with his eyes. He climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and sat still for a moment. The highway was quiet now, just the hum of the engine and the dog's uneven breathing beside him. "You're still here," he said softly, almost to himself. "That's what counts." He eased the truck back into gear, pulling away. The dog shivered, and Jack turned the heat up another notch. It wasn't until 15 miles later that Jack spotted a faded green sign for an all-night truck stop. It wasn't much, just a low building, a single gas island, and a patch of gravel big enough for a handful of rigs. But light meant shelter, and shelter meant a chance to figure out what came next. He pulled in slow, letting the air brakes settle before shutting down. The rain had eased into a mist, fine droplets clinging to his jacket as he stepped out. The dog hadn't moved much. Jack reached across and slid his arms under him again, feeling the stiffness in the retriever's muscles. Up close, the smell of wet fur and blood was stronger. Inside, the truck stop was warm but worn. The air smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long and the faint tang of fryer oil. A middle-aged man behind the counter looked up from a newspaper. "Vet nearby?" Jack asked, cutting right to it. The man's eyes went to the bundle in Jack's arms, then back to Jack. "About 8 miles up, west side of town. Might be closed at this hour. Closed or not, they'll open." The man studied Jack's face for a second, then nodded toward a corkboard near the door. "Map's there. Take it." Jack left without ordering anything. The drive to town was slow. Every bump in the road made the retriever wince, his muscles tightening under Jack's arm. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other steadying the dog whenever the truck swayed. When the glow of a small-town main street appeared ahead, Jack's focus locked on a narrow white building with a hand-painted sign, Millbrook Animal Clinic. He pulled up right in front, killed the engine, and scanned the place. Lights off, blinds drawn. Jack climbed down, rounded the truck, and rapped hard on the glass door with the side of his fist. No answer. He tried again, louder this time. A flicker of movement inside, a light snapping on down the hall. Moments later, a woman in scrubs appeared. Her hair tied back, eyes sharp but cautious. "We're closed," she started, but her gaze dropped to the retriever, and the words stalled. "He needs you," Jack said simply. The lock clicked. She held the door open, and Jack stepped inside. The air smelled of antiseptic and faint lavender. "Set him here," she said, motioning toward a metal exam table. Jack laid the dog down gently, the retriever's legs trembling as they left his arms. The vet's hands moved quick, checking the pulse, the eyes, the gums. "Severe dehydration, trauma to the legs, rope burns. You get him like this?" "Highway. Being dragged behind a car." Her jaw tightened. She didn't ask for details. "Wait outside." Jack stepped into the small reception area, sinking into one of the worn chairs. A clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching longer than the last. Through the half-open door he caught flashes of movement, the vet lifting a paw, a nurse wrapping bandages, the click of instruments on a tray. Jack stared at the floor, the smell of rain still in his clothes. He'd been driving for decades, long enough to see the worst in people play out on the road. But tonight had landed differently. It wasn't just the dog. It was the fact that someone could keep going, mile after mile, knowing exactly what was happening behind them, and feel nothing. After what felt like an hour but was probably 20 minutes, the vet came out. She wiped her hands on a towel, her expression softer now. "He's stable for the moment," she said. "Not out of the woods, but you brought him in time." Jack let out a slow breath. "What's it going to take?" "Fluids, antibiotics, rest. He'll need monitoring for internal injuries. If you're local, I'm not," Jack said. "But I'll cover whatever it costs, and I'll check in." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "He's lucky you were there." Jack didn't answer. Back in the cab, the highway stretched ahead in dark, wet silence. The dog, patched up, sedated and resting, was still in the clinic. but Jack's hands felt the ghost weight of him the whole way. As the miles rolled by, something else crept in. A quiet, unwelcome memory of another night, years back, when he hadn't stopped. Different road, different kind of wreck, and the same question that had chased him ever since: what if I had? Tonight, at least, he knew the answer. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to leave your like. Jack didn't sleep that night. After leaving the clinic, he parked his rig in the gravel lot behind the building, engine off, lights out. The rain had thinned to a mist, coating the windshield in a soft, uneven blur. Through the side window, he could see the glow from a single lamp in the clinic's front room. Every so often, a shadow passed by, either the vet or the nurse checking on the retriever. He didn't know why he stayed. He told himself it was to be there if they needed anything, to cover the bill right away. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was that something in him refused to put miles between himself and that dog until he knew it would see another sunrise. Around 4 a.m, the vet stepped outside for air. She noticed him sitting there and walked over, hands in her jacket pockets. "He made it through the night," she said. "Still weak, but he's responding." Jack nodded once, relief washing through him in a quiet, controlled way. "Good," he said. "What's next?" "A few days here, maybe a week, depending on how fast he regains strength. Someone will need to take him after." Jack looked past her toward the dim hallway inside. "I'll do it," he said. The words came out before he could think about what they meant for his schedule, his deliveries, his life on the road. She studied him for a moment, as if weighing whether he meant it. "It's not just a ride," she warned. "He's going to need patience, space, and someone who won't give up when it's inconvenient." "I'm aware," Jack said. His voice had the kind of flat certainty that doesn't invite negotiation. By mid-morning, the lot had filled with small-town traffic, farm pickups, old sedans pulling into the diner across the street. Jack stepped out for coffee and caught sight of a county sheriff's cruiser pulling into the clinic lot. The deputy, a tall man with lines cut deep around his eyes, stepped out and adjusted his hat before coming over. "You the one brought in that retriever?" Jack nodded. "Highway, 2-lane, mile marker 63, he said, saving the deputy the trouble of asking. "Car dragging him by the neck. Driver took off when I blocked him." The deputy's mouth tightened. "Any plates?" "Didn't see them clear in the rain. Dark sedan, maybe a 90s model. Driver was mid-40s, pale, dead eyes, didn't care one bit." The deputy sighed. "Not much to go on, but we'll put out a notice." He pulled a small pad from his pocket. "Need a statement?" Jack gave it, short and exact, no flourishes. The deputy wrote it down, thanked him, and left with a slow nod, the kind of look a man gives when he knows justice is a long shot, but still worth trying. Jack stayed near the truck all day, making calls to push back his delivery schedule. Dispatch wasn't happy, but he didn't explain. He didn't owe them that. By late afternoon, the vet let him in to see the retriever. The dog lay on a thick blanket in a small recovery room, legs wrapped, eyes half open. When Jack stepped closer, the dog's nose twitched and its tail tapped weakly against the floor. It wasn't much, but it was enough to pull something taut in Jack's chest. He crouched, resting a hand gently on the dog's side, feeling the slow rise and fall of its breathing. "You're tougher than you look," he murmured. That night, the deputy came back. He'd been asking around in the nearby towns, and someone at a gas station thought they'd seen a man with a similar car and a rope in the trunk. No name yet, but it was a thread to pull. Jack didn't care about the man's name. The law could handle that. His focus was on the dog in the next room, on making sure it had a future that didn't involve the back of a car. As darkness fell, the rain returned, heavier now, drumming on the roof of the clinic. Jack sat in the truck with the radio off, headlights from passing cars sweeping briefly across his windshield before vanishing into the wet black. He thought about all the miles he'd driven, all the nights he'd passed wrecks and stranded cars, sometimes stopping, sometimes not. This time, he'd stopped. And for reasons he couldn't fully explain, it mattered more than anything he'd done in a long time. The next morning, the vet gave him a list of supplies: pain meds, antibiotics, a special diet. "If you're serious about taking him," she said, You'll need to check in with a vet on your route. Keep him warm. Don't let him overexert and watch for signs of infection." Jack agreed without hesitation. The paperwork was quick, the bill less so, but he didn't flinch at the number. When the time came to carry the retriever out, the dog shifted in his arms, trying to lift its head. Jack felt the warm, damp breath against his neck, the faint weight of trust in that movement. He placed the dog gently on the passenger seat, adjusting the blanket so it covered most of its body. As he pulled back onto the highway, the rain eased again, the clouds breaking just enough for a pale light to touch the wet road. The dog's eyes followed the movement of the wipers, slow and steady. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other ready to steady the dog if the truck swayed. Mile after mile he felt the cab change, less like a workspace, more like a space with purpose. He didn't know where the road would take them next, but he knew one thing with absolute clarity. He wasn't driving alone anymore. 2 days into the drive, Jack realized the retriever was starting to notice the world again. At first it was small things, the way his ears twitched at the sound of an engine passing in the opposite lane, the way his eyes followed the movement when Jack shifted gears. Jack had given him a name without thinking much about it. Rusty. It came out one morning over coffee at a roadside diner when the waitress asked if the dog had a name for the receipt on the small dish of scrambled eggs Jack ordered just for him. "Rusty," Jack said, and it felt right. The dog didn't react to it then, but by the third time Jack used it, there was a faint tilt of the head, a spark of recognition. Rusty was healing, but slowly. The burns on his neck and legs were starting to scab over, and the limp in his back leg was more pronounced some mornings than others. Jack followed the vet's instructions to the letter: meds on time, food in small portions, frequent stops so Rusty could move without strain. The cab of the truck had shifted to accommodate him, blankets on the passenger seat, a small bowl of water wedged securely in the footwell, the heater running a notch higher than Jack preferred. On the third morning they stopped at a fuel station outside a small Missouri town. While the tank filled, Jack led Rusty a short distance from the pumps to stretch his legs. A kid in a hoodie, maybe 16, came out of the convenience store holding a soda and stopped short at the sight of Rusty. "Hey, that's the dog from the post," the kid said. Jack turned, brows narrowing. "What post?" "Online," the kid said. "Someone posted a picture of him tied up in the back of a car a couple weeks ago. Said the guy who owned him was bad news. My sister shared it." Jack felt a cold line run down his spine. "You remember anything else?" The kid shrugged. "Think it was near a trailer park outside Oak Ridge. A lot of people said the guy had hurt animals before." Jack pressed for more, but the kid didn't know much beyond that. Still, it was more than the deputy had. Back in the cab, Jack looked at Rusty, who was sitting with his paws tucked neatly under him, eyes half closed against the morning glare. "Looks like someone else knew you were in trouble," he said. The thought settled in his chest like a weight. Rusty hadn't just been unlucky. He'd been targeted. And somewhere, the man who'd done it was still out there. The rest of the day's miles passed under a low, overcast sky. Jack kept replaying the kid's words, the image of Rusty tied in the back of a car before that night on the highway. The idea that others had seen it and done nothing gnawed at him. He'd been on the edge of that himself once. Too busy, too unsure, too unwilling to get involved. Not this time. That evening, they pulled into a rest stop by the Mississippi River. Jack parked facing the water, letting Rusty out for a slow walk along the edge of the lot. The air smelled of mud and cold current. The sky bruised purple as the sun went down. Rusty stopped at the base of a picnic table, nose working at the air. Jack followed his gaze and saw a couple sitting there, eating from paper bags, watching Rusty with quiet interest. The woman smiled. "He's beautiful," she said. Jack gave a small nod. "Getting there." She asked where he'd come from, and Jack told the story in a stripped-down way, just the highway, the rope, the clinic. The man shook his head slowly. "My brother's a cop in Oak Ridge," he said. "I'll tell him to keep his ear out. Lot of bad history in that place." Another thread. Jack filed it away, gave his thanks, and guided Rusty back to the truck. That night, parked under the steady rush of the river in the dark, Jack felt a shift he hadn't expected. This wasn't just about getting Rusty safe anymore. It was about making sure the man who'd done this never had the chance to do it again. He knew that wasn't technically his job, but neither was hauling a bleeding dog off a highway at midnight. In the early hours before dawn, Rusty stirred and gave a soft whine. Jack reached over, resting a hand on his head. "It's all right," he murmured. Rusty's eyes opened, and for the first time, Jack saw something different in them. Not just survival, but trust. It caught him off guard. Trust meant permanence. Trust meant Rusty thought Jack was his, in the way dogs decide things without asking. By the time they crossed into Illinois, Jack had made up his mind. He was going to call the deputy in Millbrook and pass along everything he'd learned. About Oak Ridge, about the picture, about the man's history. If nothing came of it, fine. But if there was a chance to tie this to something bigger, he'd take it. That call turned into a 20-minute conversation that left Jack with a name. Vernon Rakes. Multiple complaints in the past, none that stuck. Lived in a rundown trailer on the edge of Oak Ridge. And according to the deputy, he'd left town right after the night Jack stopped him. "Man's a ghost now," the deputy said. "But if he surfaces, we'll know." Jack ended the call staring at the road ahead, his hands loose on the wheel. Rusty was curled up, asleep, breathing steady. Out here, it was just the two of them. But somewhere, a man named Vernon Rakes knew he'd lost something on that highway. And Jack had it. That wasn't a comfortable truth, but it was the truth all the same. 3 days later, Jack found himself parked in a gravel lot behind a feed store in a small Indiana town, waiting for his delivery window. Rusty was stretched out on the passenger seat, his head resting on a folded sweatshirt, eyes half closed but alert enough to track Jack's every movement. Jack had been checking the news in the local trucker forums, mostly out of habit, when a short thread caught his eye. Someone had spotted Vernon Rakes 2 nights ago in a truck stop outside Springfield. The post was vague, but the description matched. Pale, mid-40s, thin build, a stare that felt colder than the air around him. Jack read the post twice, then a third time, the words settling like gravel in his chest. Rakes was moving, drifting from one nowhere town to the next. The thought of him walking free didn't sit right. He'd left that night without a word, without even pretending to explain himself. And somewhere in him there had to be the kind of rot that didn't just stay with dogs. Men like that didn't have one victim. They had a trail. He thought back to the look on Rakes's face when Jack had stepped out on the highway. No panic, no shame, just a flat calculation, like he was deciding whether to bother fighting for what he'd lost. That look had stuck with Jack in the quiet stretches of road. It wasn't the look of a man who thought he'd done something wrong. It was the look of a man who thought he was untouchable. That evening, Jack stopped at a diner just off Route 36. He picked a booth by the window so he could keep an eye on the truck. Rusty was inside the cab, curled under his blanket. The waitress, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, poured him coffee before even taking his order. "You're the driver with the dog," she said, not asking. Jack nodded. "Word gets around?" She smirked faintly. "Not much else to talk about here, but you should know. Springfield's crawling with men like the one you described. They blend in, keep quiet, until they don't." Jack let her words sink in. He didn't say much after that, just listened while she talked about the town's shifts over the years. The factories closing, the bars filling earlier, the faces you didn't want to see twice. After his meal, Jack stepped out into the cold night and found a slip of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. No note, no name, just an address scrawled in quick block letters and the words, "Ask about Rakes." He stood there in the lot for a long moment, the wind pushing at the collar of his jacket. He didn't like being pulled into something that smelled like trouble. But the truth was, he was already in it. Rakes wasn't a name you could unlearn once you knew what it carried. The address led him the next day to a weathered house on the edge of a small farming community. A man in his 70s answered the door, his posture stiff, eyes guarded. "You hear about Vernon?" he asked. Jack nodded once. The man stepped aside without another word, motioning him in. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and oil. On the mantel above a cold fireplace, there were photographs in mismatched frames, most of them of dogs, a few of people, all of them a little faded. The old man lowered himself into a chair and looked at Jack for a long time before speaking. "He used to be my neighbor," he said. "Had a mean streak since he was a boy. Started with cats. People complained, but his folks didn't care. By the time he was grown, it wasn't just animals. He's hurt folks too. Always just slippery enough to avoid getting nailed for it." Jack felt his jaw tighten. "Why tell me this?" "Because I saw the post about what you did," the old man said. "Figured you might be the kind to follow through, and I know he won't stop." He leaned forward, his hands knotting together. "If you're smart, you'll stay out of it. But if you're not, if you're like me, then you'll make sure he never has the chance to put his hands on another living thing." Jack didn't answer right away. He looked around the room again at the photographs, at the way every surface seemed worn from years of use but cared for. This was a man who'd lived with loss, maybe even the kind rakes had caused. When Jack stood to leave, the old man didn't offer a handshake, just a nod that felt heavier than words. Back in the cab, Rusty lifted his head, watching Jack with steady eyes. Jack reached over, scratching gently behind his ear. "We've got more than miles to cover," he said quietly. Over the next few days, Jack noticed a change in the way he scanned parking lots, truck stops, and fuel stations. He wasn't just looking for space to park anymore. He was looking for a face, a stance, the flat, dead-eyed stare he'd seen once on the highway. And though part of him knew the odds of crossing paths with rakes again were slim, another part, the part that had walked into that man's lane without hesitation, believed it was only a matter of time. The road has a way of closing circles when you least expect it, and Jack had the uneasy sense that his was already bending back toward the beginning. By the time they reached the plains of Kansas, Rusty was moving with more confidence. The limp in his back leg was still there, but he no longer hesitated before stepping down from the cab when Jack opened the door. His coat, patchy and dulled when Jack had first seen him under the streetlights, was starting to show a faint gloss again. The bandages on his legs had come off 2 days earlier, replaced by small, clean patches of fur regrowth. Every improvement was quiet but noticeable, and Jack felt them like markers on a map he hadn't realized they were following. They stopped often, sometimes just for 10 minutes at a time, to let Rusty stretch and sniff at the grass. Jack caught himself watching the dog more than the road some days, tracking how his head lifted higher, how his ears swiveled at new sounds. In the beginning, Rusty's eyes had always been half-closed, guarded, but now they were open wider, scanning, curious. One afternoon at a small rest area, a little girl broke away from her parents and came running toward Rusty, arms out. Jack stepped forward instinctively, ready to block her, but Rusty surprised him. He stood still, let the girl wrap her arms around his neck, and even leaned into it slightly. Jack saw the parents tense, saw their relief when Rusty didn't so much as flinch. When the girl finally let go and skipped back, Rusty sat down beside Jack, looking up as if waiting for approval. Jack gave a small nod. "Good," he said. The word felt heavier than it should have, carrying a weight of trust earned, not assumed. Nights on the road had changed too. Where Jack once drove until fatigue blurred the edges of the world, now he stopped earlier, finding quiet lots where Rusty could rest without the constant hum of passing trucks. Sometimes they sat outside the cab together, Jack leaning against the bumper, Rusty lying close enough that their shoulders touched. Jack had never been one for talking to himself, but with Rusty there, words came easier. Not long conversations, just short pieces of thought, observations about the weather, the road, the kind of people they'd met that day. Rusty never reacted much, but Jack swore the dog listened. They'd been on the road nearly 2 weeks when Jack got a call from the deputy in Millbrook. "Figured you'd want to know," the deputy said. "We got confirmation Rakes was in Springfield for a while. He's gone now, headed south. Nothing we can pin on him yet, but we're watching." Jack thanked him and hung up, but the news stirred something unsettled. Rakes moving south meant he was still drifting, still looking for whatever it was that kept him moving. Jack didn't like thinking about what, or who, that might be. In Oklahoma, Jack stopped at a ranch supply store to pick up heavier blankets for the cab. Rusty came inside with him, walking without hesitation on the slick tile floor. The cashier, a man in his 40s with weathered hands, crouched down and scratched Rusty behind the ears. "He's yours?" the man asked. "Yeah," Jack said. "You take good care of him," the man replied, voice low but certain, like it wasn't a suggestion, but an acknowledgement. That night, the temperature dropped hard. Jack parked in a gravel lot behind a diner and doubled up the blankets for Rusty, who curled into them without complaint. In the stillness before sleep, Jack realized he hadn't thought of Rusty as the dog in days. He was just Rusty now, part of the truck, part of the miles, part of the reason Jack found himself stopping to notice things he used to drive past without a glance. A week later, in northern Texas, they pulled into a wide-open rest stop surrounded by fields. The sky was low and pale, the kind that made distances feel longer. Jack let Rusty out and walked him toward a line of mesquite trees at the edge of the lot. A man sitting on the hood of an old pickup called out, "That your retriever?" Jack gave a short nod. The man smiled faintly. "Saw one just like him years ago. Didn't make it. Looks like yours got lucky." Jack didn't correct him, but he knew luck had nothing to do with it. Rusty was alive because Jack had decided not to keep driving that night, because he'd blocked a lane and stepped into someone else's mess without thinking twice. Back at the truck, Rusty climbed in on his own, settling into the seat with the ease of someone who finally believed it was his. Jack started the engine and looked over at him. "You're getting better," he said. Rusty's tail thumped once against the blanket, slow but steady. In the days that followed, Jack caught himself thinking ahead, not just to the next stop or the next delivery, but to what it would mean to keep Rusty for good. The idea had seemed impossible in the first week, a complication he couldn't afford. But now, with Rusty's head resting on his knee while they waited at a way station, it felt less like a choice and more like a fact that had already settled in. By the time they crossed into New Mexico, the road stretched ahead in long sunlit ribbons, the air dry and clean. Rusty stood with his paws on the window ledge, watching the landscape roll by. Jack felt something he hadn't in years, a quiet steadiness, the sense that maybe after enough miles a man could come back to himself without even realizing it. Rusty had pulled him into that without ever asking, and Jack wasn't about to let it go. They were crossing the desert stretch between Tucumcari and Albuquerque when Jack saw him. Midday sun, heat coming off the asphalt, the road shimmering ahead, and there, parked crooked in the gravel lot of a half-collapsed service station, was a dark sedan with a familiar dent on the rear bumper. Jack's grip on the wheel tightened. He eased off the gas, scanning the lot as they passed. Sitting on the hood, cigarette in hand, was Vernon Rakes. Same pale face, same hollow eyes, watching the road like it was his own. Jack drove past, every instinct telling him to keep going. Rusty was asleep on the passenger seat, the wind ruffling the fur around his ears. The smart move was to leave it, call the deputy later, give them the location. But something in Jack locked up at the thought of driving away. This was the man who'd dragged Rusty until the rope burned into his skin. The man who'd looked him in the eye on the highway and felt nothing. And now he was sitting there like the world still belonged to him. Jack took the next turnoff, looped back, and pulled his rig into the lot, engine idling low. Rusty woke, ears flicking forward, sensing the change in Jack's breathing. Jack opened the door, stepped down, and closed it without slamming. Rakes watched him approach, the cigarette glowing between two fingers. "Well," he said, voice dry and flat. "Look who it is." Jack stopped a few feet away, keeping his stance loose but ready. "Dog's alive," he said. "Thought you'd want to know." Rakes smirked faintly, flicking ash to the ground. "Ain't my dog anymore." "That's the problem," Jack said. They stood there in the heat, the sun pressing down, the air thick with the smell of oil and dust. Rakes didn't move, but his eyes tracked every shift in Jack's weight. "You followed me?" he asked. "No," Jack said. "Road brought me here, but maybe it was always going to." Rakes let the silence hang, then tossed the cigarette to the ground and crushed it under his boot. "You think you're the first to play hero? Dog's just a mutt. You'll get tired of him." Jack's jaw tightened. "That's where you're wrong." For a moment, neither moved. Then Rakes stepped forward, his hands loose at his sides, and Jack felt the familiar coil of tension in his muscles. He wasn't afraid, but he knew this was the moment to decide how far he was willing to go. The sound of an engine cut through the heat. A county sheriff's SUV rolled into the lot, dust curling up behind it. The deputy who stepped out wasn't from Millbrook. Different county, same badge. He looked between the two men, eyes narrowing. Something going on here? Jack didn't look away from Rakes. Yeah, he said. This man's wanted for animal cruelty. Got a witness statement and a description filed in Millbrook County. The deputy's gaze shifted to Rakes, whose smirk had thinned into something harder. That so? The deputy asked. Man's lying, Rakes said smoothly. But the deputy didn't move. Jack reached into his back pocket and pulled out his phone, already cued to the pictures the vet had taken of Rusty that first night. Rope burns, bleeding paws, eyes glazed from exhaustion. He held the screen out without a word. The deputy studied it, jaw setting. Sir, he said to Rakes, I'm going to need you to come with me. Rakes didn't argue, but the look he gave Jack as the cuffs went on was the same as that night on the highway. Flat, empty, calculating. Only now there was something else there too. A flicker of recognition that the road had bent against him. Jack stood in the heat until the SUV pulled away, dust swallowing it on the horizon. When he climbed back into the cab, Rusty was sitting up, watching the door. Jack ran a hand over his head, feeling the steady warmth there. It's done, he said quietly. They rolled back onto the highway, the desert stretching out ahead. Jack felt the tension in his shoulders ease for the first time in weeks. It wasn't a victory parade, no clean ending, but it was enough. A man off the road, a dog in the passenger seat, and miles still waiting to be driven. As the sun dipped low, the sky burning orange over the mesas, Rusty lay down again, head on Jack's leg. Jack kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on Rusty's back. The road was theirs now, and it would stay that way. They kept heading west after the arrest, not because Jack had a reason to, but because the road felt open in that direction. Rakes was now someone else's problem, locked in a small-town holding cell, his reach cut short. Jack didn't expect to hear more about him. Justice, in his experience, wasn't a straight line. It was a long road with a lot of dead ends, but this time, he'd seen enough to believe the man wouldn't be hurting anything for a while. Rusty adjusted to the rhythm of the miles as if he'd been born for it. He started sitting upright in the passenger seat for longer stretches. His nose lifted toward the vents when the cooler air from higher altitudes slipped into the cab. Jack watched him out of the corner of his eye, quietly keeping score of every sign that the dog was leaving the worst of his past behind. The stiffness in his legs was almost gone. His coat had grown in smooth and full, catching the sunlight in a way that made strangers stop to look twice. In Arizona, they stopped at a gas station tucked under a high red bluff. A man at the next pump pointed at Rusty and said, "That's a good-looking retriever." Jack just nodded, a small twitch at the corner of his mouth. Compliments weren't what mattered. What mattered was the way Rusty stood there without flinching at the sound of the air compressor kicking on, the way his eyes stayed calm when a motorcycle roared past on the highway. They spent a night in Flagstaff, parking the rig in a quiet corner of a big empty lot. Jack bought a cheap folding chair from a store down the road and sat outside the cab under the wide, cold sky. Rusty lay at his feet, his head resting on one paw, watching the dark. There was no hurry in either of them now. For the first time in years, Jack felt like he wasn't racing to stay ahead of something. The next morning, he made a call to the vet in Millbrook. "He's doing fine," Jack told her. "Better than fine. Thought you should know." She sounded pleased but not surprised. "I figured you'd see it through," she said. "He's your dog now, whether you planned on it or not." Jack didn't bother denying it. In the following weeks, Rusty became part of the road's landscape, part of Jack's routine. He knew which rest areas had good patches of grass, which diners kept water bowls outside for traveling dogs, which fuel stations had shady spots in the afternoon. People started recognizing the pair, especially in towns they passed through more than once. A waitress in Amarillo remembered Rusty's name before Jack's. A mechanic in Tulsa left a box of dog biscuits on the counter for them. Jack didn't talk much about the night he'd found Rusty. It wasn't a story he wanted to pass around like a campfire tale. The people who needed to know already knew, and the rest could just see the dog beside him and know enough. One evening, parked on the edge of a bluff in Utah, Jack watched the sun drop low over the desert, the light hitting the rocks until they glowed. Rusty stood beside him, the wind ruffling his fur. Jack reached down and felt the weight of his head press into his palm. It was a small thing, but in it was everything. Trust, survival, the quiet understanding that they were both still here. As the stars came out, Jack thought about the road still ahead. There would be storms, breakdowns, bad weather, and long nights. But there would also be mornings like this with Rusty's head lifting toward the first light, the miles opening up without a shadow on them. He had no illusions about himself. He wasn't a saint, and he wasn't out here to change the world. But for one life, one dog, he'd made a difference. And that was enough. When they finally pulled back onto the highway, the night was clear, the air cool through the vents. Rusty settled into the passenger seat, his eyes closing but his body leaning slightly toward Jack's side. Jack kept one hand steady on the wheel, the other resting on the warm fur at his shoulder. The road stretched out ahead, and for once Jack didn't care where it ended. Thanks for making it this far. But don't leave yet. On the screen next to you there's another exciting story. Click subscribe to the channel and share. I'll be waiting for you there.